The LDS Church is a top 100 investor in the top 100 stocks on the New York Stock Exchange.
Doesn't play by the same rules, is not paying taxes. Theoretically, if you were to just keep scaling that out, there's no limit.
Their investment fund is so big and they make so much interest on the investment that they would never have to take $1 in again from tithe, $1. And only part of the interest they make on their money would fund the global church.
They just outbid Bill Gates.
It's a lot of these pastors who build these huge brands. Just when they die, they have their kids take over. You're passing billion-dollar businesses off to your kids, and in the pulpit you could say, it's not mine. Fuck yeah, it's yours.
Because if you talk about Christianity, like they come in hot.
It saddened me to see how dumb American Christians are.
So to get really like tinfoil hatty and ominous, so we say that which church has the most private land in Florida, and there was one other state?
Oh,
The
yes,
LDS,
Illinois.
yeah.
Okay, so they have all this land that is separated from government, doesn't play by the same rules, is not paying taxes. Theoretically, if you were to just keep scaling that out, there's no limit, correct? So then you would have a church that is now kind of in charge of the country in a way.
They just outbid Bill Gates on, I think it was 1,000, is it about 1,000 acres in Washington State?
200,000.
200,000 acres in Washington State.
So how is that? I would argue that it's so infused then. There is no separation, because if you do, let's say you amass all of this land and now you're influencing the markets and then these private companies and
So the LDS Church is a top 100 shareholder in the top 100 stocks on the New York New York Stock Exchange. So let me rephrase that. Let me say that again. The LDS Church is a top 100 investor in the top 100 stocks on the New York Stock Exchange.
And I would argue that those private businesses have more of an impact on the average American's daily life than government does, right? Who's paying for government? Who's paying for these people to run?
Yeah.
That seems really enmeshed.
I agree. So let's play that out even more.
Yeah.
So and I'm going to take their side. I'm going to play devil's advocate, right? The LDS Church would say, wouldn't you want, and the show talks about this, there's separation of church and state is, I won't say it's a myth, but it doesn't exist because your moral codes and my moral codes dictate the way we vote. So church will always dictate state, but what you want is personal, individualized morals in church to dictate state, not a corporation, a church corporation to dictate state. Because if you remember the Catholic Church back in the day, in the 1400s, I don't really want an America to look like that. Right? And you don't want the Crusades to happen again. And you don't like there's a lot of bad things that happen when a single church, a single entity, a single denomination or single faith takes over a government. So they would say, hey, it's good that we're helping steer policy. But like I said, there's only a select few people that run that organization.
Yeah.
So it's not the people. It's not even the congregants of the Mormon Church that are dictating policy. It's the leadership, and the leadership care about money and control. At the end of the day, it's money and control. And you should watch that new clip that we posted today, because it is wild. Like, if you just feel it's just as bad as Kenneth Copeland. Like, you will like to give us your money because we will keep your name on God's books, you know? And it's just like, Jesus, it's wild.
Copeland was the 18,000 square foot house that I was telling you about. That's Copeland's. Well, in the name of his church, but yeah.
I mean, name a celebrity that has a main house that's that big. Most of them don't. Most of them do not. Absolutely not. Maybe Oprah.
Well, and this is a big one
taxes.
too. The big one too is they'll say, oh, it's not our house, or oh, it's not our airplanes, or oh, for Kenneth Copeland, it's not my oil fields. It's the churches. But it's like, dude, you run the church. When you die, I don't know if he has.
I think he has family in it.
But so it's called nepotism. It's a lot of these pastors who build these huge brands. Just when they die, they have their kids take over. So it is yours. Like, it's not yours on paper, but you control the machine. So it is yours. Just like Joel Osteen, his daughter runs worship, and his son, until recently, worked in the church. And Ed Young's, half his kids work in the church. It's just, Mark Driscoll's just brought his son in as a pastor. And I mean, like, it's just like, what are you guys doing? You're passing a business off from generation to Billy Graham, passed his off to Franklin Graham. And it's like you're passing billion-dollar businesses off to your kids, and in the pulpit you could say, it's not mine. Fuck yeah, it's yours. Like, what do you mean?
Franklin's son is the number 2. I mean, he's the COO now of Samaritan's Purse.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you got 3 generations right there. And then he'll hand it off to his kids.
Yep.
Yeah, I saw one pastor saying he was like really amped up, as like most of them are, because it's all theatrics. But he's like, God wants me to have a $65 million jet. And then someone else, it was an African pastor.
Creflo Dollar.
And he was like, someone accused me of being worth $150 million. That is an insult. And I'm like, oh, the audacity.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
What?
Well, and when you and so this is something that rubs me wrong. There's verses in the New Testament written by a guy named Paul, and Paul wrote a lot of the New Testament books, and he was this guy who was killing early Christians. Like he hated Christians. And then the story goes, he saw Jesus on the road, he got blinded, and he had this massive conversion where he's like, he accepted Christ, and he's going out throughout all of Palestine and ends up in Rome, and he's preaching this gospel of Christ, right? And it's really powerful stories. And so he's trying to control and give structure to these small home churches that he's starting. And we should talk about the definition of the original biblical definition of a church later, but he's starting these groups, these gatherings and they called it the way. So it's like, this is the way to live, like the way. And he goes, pastors or really itinerant rabbis deserve double honor. And so pastors today will stand on stage and be like, I deserve double honor. But I'm like, you look back at these early pastors, Paul said, you cannot take anything with you except the sandals on your feet and your robe. Don't even take money. Because what it did is it made you rely on the generosity of others as you spread your message. So you have these dudes not taking money. They only have one pair of sandals. They don't have a family. They don't have a home. They're literally itinerant. They're just wandering homeless people, basically, spreading the way of Christ's way. And so he goes, they deserve double honor. Most of those fools died. They were either murdered, they rotted in jail, they were beheaded. Like, they lived a very short, painful existence. And so what did Paul say? These men deserve double honor. Heck yeah, they do. Yeah. But I'm sorry, if you standing on a stage and you're worth $200 million, I can't even, if I was in your position, those words, I would have so much fear of being struck by lightning. Those, I deserve double honor. It's like, dude, how can you even compare yourself?
But you would believe that you would be protected from that vengeance.
Yeah, but that's the thing though. They stand on that stage and they say that we deserve double honor, and everybody in the pews goes, mm-hmm.
So they just don't know the history?
This is going to be really brutal. I would argue most Christians are so theologically weak and don't open their Bibles that they are spoon-fed whatever this pastor or that pastor wants to spoon-feed them. So there's an interesting story. So we put a post out probably 3 weeks ago, and I was frustrated. And I was like, you know what? For all you people saying we're not showing the other side of the coins, we've sent out over 800 emails. No pastors are responding. So if you're a pastor, shoot us a DM. I'll take a call personally with you, and we're going to fly out and sit down with you. Over 250 pastors responded. It was the coolest thing ever. So one of them is from Germany, and he's a German Methodist pastor. And in Germany, to become a minister, it's rigorous. And you have to go to seminary. You have to speak Latin, Greek. He speaks German and English. So 4 languages, genius guy. And I'm like, so what brought you to America? Because he'd never lived in America. And he's like, I moved here 6 months ago because my father was an American. He came over during the war, knocked up my mom, and he's died now. He's like, I want to experience America. So I asked to transfer to a Methodist church in America. And he goes, and so I was like, this is really interesting. And so, because in Germany, if you want to give to your church, you give through your tax return. So there's literally a box where you check your denomination, and then based off the taxation of that denomination, you pay the government, then the government pays the church. So talk about church and state still married, Germany is that. But so I'm like, what is the biggest aha moment you saw in an American church? And he said, when I first started preaching, I would preach something and I'd look up and everybody would be like, amen. And I would say, stop, sit down. Like, question what I'm saying. Actually open your Bible and see if what I'm saying is accurate. And he goes, Nathan, it saddened me to see how dumb American Christians are. They don't care to like dive in, and that's a very broad brush, but he's like, yeah, most people just took what I had to say as like God-given fact. In the video we posted today, the title is Theology. You can't have theology without psychology. And so even though he's up there trying to preach the words from the Bible, his own interpretation of that is coming out. And he's like, the last time something like that happened, where a whole group of people in mass took verbatim what a leader was saying, what happened?
Genocide.
Hitler.
Yeah.
Genocide. Yeah. And so he's like, it terrifies me that Christians in America are so biblically illiterate now, and they just listen to what, I think Billy Graham's a great guy. They listen to what Billy Graham said. They listen to what Joel Osteen says, Creflo Dollar, Kenneth Copeland, and they take it as the message of Christ. And that's the scary part to me.
Well, I think what's confusing to me, I recently had an episode and we made a clip out of it where I was talking about like my spirituality and my understanding of the Old Testament and the New Testament, and how there seems to be like a massive discrepancy in God itself. Like they seem like two different things, and I'm getting torn apart in the comment section because if you talk about Christianity, like they come in hot. And I was like, how dare you think you're anyone to even question anything? Like, you just need to take this. And I'm like, no, in the clip itself, I talk about like one of the beautiful things about about the Jewish religion is that's the whole point, is wrestling with God. You're supposed to. You're not supposed to take everything. And the way that I interpret this is going to be totally different than how you do. And who's to say whose perspective is correct? You know what I mean? Yeah. But for some reason, there is like a mass understanding that you're not supposed to interpret it. It's not for interpretation. Like that is what people will say that are like very ideological. And that seems a little bit scary because, again, why am I taking your interpretation? Like it's almost like before the Bible was translated, like you don't want people to know because then they have to think for themselves. Correct.
Well, there's a difference, which I got torn apart. I did a live stream with our biggest hater. Oh gosh. But I said brave. There's what's up?
That's brave.
Yeah. He ended up eating himself alive, but it took a while, sadly. But there's one of the, we'll call him founding fathers of the psychedelic revolution, Alan Watts. I love his work, just it makes me think. But he says this thing, there's a difference between belief and faith. And on that live stream, everybody's like, don't bring in that psychological jargon. And I'm like, well, we're all individual beings with our own thought process. So no matter what, we have to bring in psychology. Yep. But belief is a belief in a like presupposition of what you think is accurate. So like those Christians believe the 66 book canon, the Protestant canon of the Bible, is the literal word of God. And then anything outside of that is an attack on their faith. Faith, though, is you're putting faith in this journey that it's going to lead you where you need to go. And so there's a big difference between belief and faith. And I didn't flip that switch until my late 20s, I would say. Like I had belief in Christianity my whole life, but I didn't even know this thing called the Apocrypha existed. And that was an extra set of books in the Bible for the first 1800 years. And so when I heard about that, I was like, wait, what? There was books that were taken out of the Bible a couple hundred years ago? And so the 66 book Bible, like, is it the literal word of God? And once you start exploring it with this idea of faith where I'm not scared where it's going to lead me, the story becomes way more beautiful. And that's what you're doing. You know, you're exploring faith and exploring spirituality. And it's just sad that Christians have become, and it goes back to the conversation about the German pastor, Christians have become so illiterate in regards to their theology that they're just scared of anything that doesn't sound exactly like them. And that's, I painted with a very broad brush there, but it's like, that's the problem with the current like evangelical Christian is they're scared to debate and without just screaming.
It's scared to offend, right? Like that's where the prosperity gospel kicks in, where we're just going to talk about how everything's going to be great and everything's going to be good and what it takes to do that versus having some of those hard, uncomfortable discussions. And you get to a point where you're like, do you even really truly know what you're getting like what you really truly know what you're defending? You're being offensive, but do you really know what you're standing up for?
Yeah.
And that's a whole other level.
Yeah, the miracle, like the promising of miracles is also really interesting too, because to piggyback off of that, you have someone that'll come up with an ailment and they're assuming that everything is supposed to be perfect. So you might have someone that's wheelchair bound, or they're blind in one eye, or whatever the case may be, and they're like, Jesus needs to heal me. But it's like, what if that is actually part of the process? Like, what if it's not supposed to go away? And that sucks, of course. Like, you want to be in like full health and full capability, but like, it's like you're kind of missing the point. Like, there's supposed to be trials and tribulations, and that's like what makes you stronger and gives you growth. And if everything is perfect, you're going to be stagnant. So like, maybe that is a gift in a weird way. Like, your one eye that doesn't work is the gift, and the fact that you don't see it and you keep paying this pastor $2,000 a month, like, you're so lost. And I see that with identity and like putting the label on you, and like, it's not to take away the value of religion, because I think there is a lot of it, but I think that when you put a label on something, you kind of get calcified in that thing. So if it's, I'm a Catholic, or I'm Jewish, or whatever the thing might be, it's like, now I can't wrestle with these ideas because now I'm almost dogmatic in them.
For sure.
So, I mean, there's a lot of flexibility that I think that people are willing to strip away that label. And it's not to, again, like, take God out of the equation. I think that's important for most people, to believe in something bigger than yourself. But like, I don't think letting someone else decide what that journey is makes sense. And I saw that you had Nietzsche on your reading list, and I love him. I think he's amazing. And that one of the quotes that I just did for a solo episode, it's not out yet, but it was, as for like the right way, the only way, the true way, it does not exist. So when anyone is speaking for God, and this is what God says, and if you don't give me money, you're off of his list, run the other way.
For sure. Yeah. 100%,
run the other way.
100%. Yeah, we explore some pretty cool topics in the show. We have a guy named Dan McClellan, and if you don't follow Dan on Instagram, you should. He's just he speaks Greek, Hebrew, ancient Aramaic, and he's a Mormon. He's a practicing Mormon. So his story is really interesting. But I mean, like, he just annihilates these preconceived concepts of how people take the Bible and apply it to their life, and I think that was, for me, if I could encourage anybody listening that reads the Bible, like, try to do a pass through just with the lens of history. Don't try to say, how does this apply to me? Or, man, what can I get out of it? Just say, I want to read this book because it's the greatest history book in the history of mankind. So read it from a historical lens. So when you're in Israel, read it through the lens of Moses, or through the lens of his 12 sons, or, when you're in, like, when you're going through the kings, put yourself in the king, like in that king's position, and the prophets especially, like, or put yourself in Job's shoes. It's like, you realize everything's cultural, so what's happening in these stories is it's cultural, those Mosaic laws. So this is a bender for me, is when I realized the Mosaic covenants in the Bible were not religious covenants per se. They were legal covenants. And so when you, like, those tithes, you didn't pay tax on top of those tithes. Those tithes were your tax for society. You were paying for the poor. You were paying for festivals. Well, not paying. You were bringing animals for the poor. And grain for the poor. You were bringing animals and grain for the parties that you were throwing. And you got to, guess what? Enjoy your own tithes. Like, you were paying for the priests to upkeep the temple, or you were bringing them food, not paying, but you were bringing them food so they could eat it. When they've, there's a big one, volunteered at the temple. So any pastor who says, they paid a Levitical tithe back in the day, and you should pay us 10% because they paid the Levites 10%. Those Levites were volunteering. They weren't taking their salary.
Or a house stipend.
Yeah, or a housing stipend, or they weren't getting their cell phone paid for, or their car paid for. It's like, so that's what's crazy, is when we look at the Bible and try to just map it over modern culture, that's when we have these weird collisions. But when you look at it in its proper place in history, and you try to dissect the beauty of the culture, and then you can say, okay, what big, like, ethos structures of that Mosaic covenant should pull through, then you kind of pull the beauty out of that, as opposed to getting dogmatic and stuck in your ways and stuck in these 10% tithes. And it's just it's wild.
Yeah, you see that a lot with things that used to be legal and now they're kind of being claimed as religious. So what I didn't know, I started reading this book. It's called The Killing of the Witches, and it's really, really good. I'm doing the audiobook, so it's like extra juicy, but it's basically how America was founded and the Puritans, and it was saying that...
Wait, you're doing you're reading the audiobook?
No, I'm not reading it.
Oh.
No, that sounds confusing. I'm listening to the audiobook. Okay. But I wish I was. That'd be kind of cool. But when the Puritans came here, that there were only two religious, I guess, acts you could say, and it was baptism and communion. That was it. And then marriage was 100% legal. It had nothing to do with the church. And then what I was always told, I was raised Catholic, was that was entirely religious. And that was like the whole thing when people were trying to create, equal rights for gay people to get married. They're like, well, this is a religious thing and God says man and woman. And I always thought that, but it turns out it wasn't religious. That was actually kind of new. It was always legal. That was a state ceremony. That was never a religious ceremony.
Correct. Well, a funny thing is the idea of tithing is not strictly Jewish and Christian. Most cultures in those regions tithe. You could be polytheistic and you'd still tithe. There was a culture in Egypt at the same exact time, and if they had to tithe, which remember just means a tenth, so they had to tithe 10% of their crops to their God every year. And then if they didn't have to trench in water, but rains fell to water it, they'd have to double tithe. So they'd have to give 20%. So tithing is not Jewish per se or Christian per se. It was a cultural act that was happening around all of Palestine, that whole region. So when people are like, "Oh, tithing's Christian," it's like, nah, dude, it's not. Like it came from this Mosaic covenant, but there's tons of cultures doing it. Christianity's kind of just taken a few things and ran with it. Yeah. Well, but that's the thing, is when you start exploring this as in the beauty and intricacy of it, I always say, like, my faith has never been stronger. It's definitely my own now, but it's never been stronger because for this show in particular, I had to explore all of this.
Yeah.
So, and I've seen it with you too.
Yeah, no, it's been quite the transformation. But like you mentioned something earlier that was really cool. It's like, if you're not afraid of what's in there, if you go from an angle of that, like, if I read something in here, it's going to change my life so much. Like not being scared of what you're learning. Well,
and map that over to the show, right? This is where what gets cool. Okay, if our viewers aren't scared of the data we're presenting, and they're like, and this is how the show opens with Tom Price, who's a philosopher and theologian out of Oxford in England. He's like, you got to take off your biased glasses, so to speak, and put them on the table, and you need to watch the show and learn all this. And at the end of it, you're going to put your glasses on, and hopefully the prescription's wrong. And you got to pop those lenses out and put revised, better lenses in. And it's like, we don't need to fear the data and fear the details, because we're not questioning your faith. We're not questioning Christ. We're not trying to tear down your belief structures. Hopefully we can encourage faith a little bit. But the goal is to say, hey, you guys give so generously. And you're like, Christian Americans are the most generous people in the world. So it's like, instead of just giving haphazardly, give with purpose and focus, and you guys could change the world, like, overnight. That's what's so cool
with those numbers. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And the whole thing with the numbers, and I mentioned this earlier, is like, I'm even questioning when people say we could solve world hunger for 40 billion, or we can solve the top 10 global issues for X billion. I'm even questioning those, because are those even like transparent figures? How much per dollar actually goes to impact? So it's like questioning everything versus being told what you need to do, or feel manipulated that you're not a good person if you don't do it, and ask questions. And that was really cool what you said about the German pastor. But he's like, why is everyone shaking their head at me? You should question everything I say.
Well, that goes back to the madness of crowds, which was also on your list. But literally, your neuropsychology and chemistry changes once you're in a group of people. So you have these people that are fainting, and it's not that they're not truly thinking that that's what's happening, but you're kind of being reinforced with this kind of group psychosis or placebo effect. And you have these poor people that are giving a lot of money to be healed, or like, God forbid, a sick child, and you have the church taking it. And then there was this one, it was awful. This little boy ended up dying, and the parents had come over from India, and they donated all of this money, and there was like this investigative journalist that was asking, like, well, are you disappointed in the pastor? And they're like, no, it was my own fault, and it was my karma, and it goes for 3 lineages, and that's why. So it was really my fault. I didn't believe enough, or it was like this karmic resonance as to why it happened. And she goes, well, where did you learn that? And he goes, the pastor.
Yeah.
At what point is it not fraud though? So again, it's like, it's not entirely like it's a reservation where they're not accountable at all to the government. Like, does that qualify as fraud? Because you're promising something that you can't deliver. You can't deliver that.
Well, that's the danger of religion, I think, organized religion. And there's a big danger to it. Like, to your point about the LDS church, and, you said put your tinfoil hat on. I don't think it's too far-fetched to put that tinfoil hat on, to be honest. If the regulations don't change, or if I've come to the conclusion there's only 2 solutions to this problem, because the nonprofit space has so much capital flushing through it, and there's so much fraud and embezzlement and abuse to the system now, that Philip Hackney, the former chief counsel of the IRS, says it's going to buckle. He's like, there's just so much abuse, and the government has no control over it. Like, there's just no way to wrangle it. And so he's like, it's going to buckle in some, like when you burn something down, things grow through the ashes. But it's like, do you want it to buckle, or is there enough time to kind of push the brakes and say, hey, there's solutions, but they can either be governmental or internal. And so that we're hoping that our solution, it's not the perfect solution, but it's going to be a solution. And hopefully it brings enough accountability in that it kind of helps right the abuse in the system. But to go back to that, the LDS church, just think if they continue to buy up land, and their investment fund is so big now, and I'm going to spoil a big thing in the show here. Their investment fund is so big, and they make so much interest on the investment, that they would never have to take $1 in again from tithe, $1. And only part of the interest they make on their money would fund the global church.
Wow.
So let that sink in. They have $160 billion in cash. They make about on average between 10 and 14 billion a year in interest. The operations of their global church is 6.5-ish billion. So no LDS church, or congregant, I'm not knocking your faith. I'm saying you could never give $1 again, and your church would flourish and thrive. But they still say, give us your 10%. And so that's so backwards that I can't. So talk about abuse. It's like they've created such a machine that the machine just eats up everything.
Yeah, I like that you guys are looking at technology and kind of more the private and internal accountability versus government, because I totally agree government messes most things up. It would be kind of cool to see it kind of ran like a DAO, essentially. So you had like the congregation that had full visibility of everything, and then also maybe like voting rights over where the resources are going. And
we call them, a for-profit company or a publicly traded company as shareholders, but nonprofits, we like to say they have stakeholders. So the stakeholders are the donors, and those donors aren't tied into profits on the back end, but they're tied into the mission and direction of the organization. So those stakeholders have vested interest in the success of the mission.
There you go.
And it's like there should be voting rights. And a lot of denominations do that. And that's the sad part, is denominations are dying and hemorrhaging members, but the non-denominational space is skyrocketing. And why is that? They got good music. They're putting on performances. They have Santa Claus flying in his sleigh overhead. Their children's care is like the best in the U.S. And they have good donuts and coffee, and it's become a show. And so naturally, of course, the American consumer will go there, but it's like, at what cost?
I mean, so much of it's like the production of it's astonishing.
Yeah.
And if that's what you don't want to do, I mean, great. That music is super catchy, great,
sure.
like fireworks and light show, all for it. But I think if you're going to do that, you have to be honest about what you're doing. And it's a production, it's not a church.
Yeah.
And just pay the taxes like everyone else does. And then we'll leave you alone.
Yeah.
But I think it's like the blatant dishonesty about all of it that to me is the most irritating part, because I don't care how intense you want to make your show. By all means go for it, but just pay your taxes then.
Yeah, the sad part the tough part is, like we said, the church is really hard to define. So in the 1970s, they brought in these things which Chris touched on, associations or auxiliaries or conventions of churches. So now churches are absorbing nonprofits, secular nonprofits, and as they absorb these nonprofits, they flip them and register them as churches. And so once they register them as a church, that nonprofit no longer has to file a 990. And so you have churches buying out radio stations, TV networks. So they're literally conglomerates now scooping up these different entities, bringing them under their banner, and then none of them have to file tax or 990s with the IRS. And so now I can say my church, let's call it Microphone Church, I acquired Chris's table nonprofit. So I'm going to bring his nonprofit under my fold, and then I'm also going to acquire your podcast because it's so great, right? So now all of us are churches, and I want to tell my people that are giving to me, I want to be able to say I give 30% of my money away. So I'm going to give 15% to Chris, 15 to you, and I say we gave 30% away.
Yeah.
All it did was transfer to my other bank accounts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No way.
That's what's happening.
So, and also another alternative is just get rid of taxes for everyone else then.
I think that's a guy. Hey,
You know what I mean? I'm for that solution. So you guys do it. I just want to be able to do it too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I just think if there was a better balance between the nonprofits trying to solve the world's problems and the government trying to be the world police, and there was a better balance there, it's just, it's like government is trying to do everything they possibly can in the world, and it's like, come on, like we've got people dying, people homeless, people starving, people sick, and we're worried about everything else. And then you've got the nonprofits who can do something about it.
It goes back to social capital, right? It's like we need to, the church, us as individuals, the government needs to focus on their social community. And if we got back to that, I feel a lot of these problems would shake themselves out. It's like if the church focused on the 200 people in their congregant and their 10-mile radius, that would build that community up. And instead of focusing on the global, we want to be big on social media, and we want to have 5,000 people watching our live streams, and we want to focus on your community. Just like the nonprofit, focus on your community. Hey, U.S. government, maybe focus on your social capital, which is the U.S. And if we went back to those communities, I think a lot of these the big fraud and abuse and inearment would kind of just disappear, but who knows? And
I believe that this show that will be coming out at the end of the year is going to be the beginning of that turning point. And then the solution that we're creating is going to evolve over just going to be multiple versions of it over the years, and partnering up with the community on it. That Nathan said something. It was like, hey, like when originally when Jesus was on earth, right? Like his teaching was right here. And then over the time, you had Paul, and then you had everybody else, and then somehow we got like way over here, and it's to turn. Well, you use the river flowing, right? Yeah. To start to get the water to start flowing back the other way. And so I think that the education aspect of it and what we're doing is going to be the start of that, and that's exciting.
Yeah. And again, we're not like, I want to encourage faith. I want to encourage your spiritual walk. I want to encourage yours, my own. Like, it's like, I feel like that's where we come alive and become good community members when we realize life's bigger than ourselves. But it's like, at the same time, we're going to be pointing out very specific problems, and it all goes back to the legal tax code and guidelines. And so you can't hate on us for doing that. It's like, every system needs reform. And I think that's a big note, is government has to reform over and over. Like all school systems, hospitals, we always have to reform, because if we're not reforming, we're going to end up just becoming like the Vatican, which is now like you can walk through it and pay your fee and see their beautiful paintings and you leave. That system's crumbling. And so if the religious and nonprofit sector does not reform, it's going to crumble.
Just when I see how expensive structures are in the religious world, I just shake my head. I mean, so much money goes to those, like the temples, right? Mm-hmm. Do you have any good numbers or data on that?
I think the Mormon Church spent $1 billion on their temple in Rome.
That's so surprising, because when I think Mormon, I just think like a buggy and minimalism and
a young man on a mission, dressed a certain way, on a bike,
simple guy.
Yeah.
That's not. I would never have guessed that.
Yeah. Well, because they're actually, like, I live in Utah. They're amazing people.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And it's but the machine, you know, if you're a for-profit company, you have to work for your profit. You have to sell a good profit, because if someone outpaces you or outsells you, you die on the vine. But if you have a built-in revenue stream that you can forecast year over year, and as long as you don't change your model up, that revenue stream is consistent, what are you going to naturally do? Like, you're just going to build thicker walls, thicker insulation. You're going to just create a machine that's impenetrable. And that's what the LDS Church has done. And I'm not, I am not just knocking the LDS Church. Like, when you look at the Vatican and why Martin Luther in the 1500s demanded reform, and he nailed those 95 theses to the wall of the cathedral, he was so angry with how the church was extracting money out of people. Like, most of his 95 theses are about indulgences. And my favorite indulgence is, if you or thesis, or not theses, I think it's number 44 or 45, is he goes, if you are walking to your church or your temple or your cathedral to buy an indulgence and you step over someone in need, you are going to incur the wrath of God.
Wow.
And it was so powerful, because it's like, you're like, oh man, does this map back to the Bible? Yep, it checks out. You know? And so when you look at why he was so angry, he was angry that the Pope was building the Vatican and the Basilica off the back of poor Germans' money. So there's a great line that Martin Luther says. He goes, I can see them in Rome now, drinking their fine Italian wines, laughing about all the stupid beer-drinking Germans whose money's paid for it all. That's what Martin Luther says in one of his writings.
Wow.
And so you map that idea over to the States, and it's like the same thing. When you drive through Texas, what are the two biggest institutions you see? Churches and hospitals. It's like, we've officially built an institution. And so I always say there was one Vatican, and we had to tear that down. You had the Protestant Reformation. Well, now we got 400,000 little mini Vaticans all over the U.S. with the same business model as the Vatican. They're just small. You know, some might have 50 people, some might have 50,000, but they're just mini Vaticans where one person or a couple people control the strings of everybody's purses and wallets. So,
what's going to happen with all the farmland? I know we'll lay out that one.
I really want to put a tin hat on. Do you got one?
No, for sure. I had this this girlfriend, she has like a crypto podcast, but she has a tinfoil crown.
Nice.
She just puts it on when she goes like anti-establishment. I'm like, that's amazing. I need to get one of those.
I didn't know what that meant when you initially said it.
The tinfoil hat?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's just because like it's people that are scared that they're being watched and the radiation and all of the things. But honestly, most of the things that you say before you say, let me put my hat on, it's like the Alex Jones thing. It's like, well, how often is he right? It's usually like 86%. It's pretty good.
For sure. So I want to hear about your spiritual journey. Like, where did you come from?
So all over the place. So Jewish by blood.
Okay.
My grandfather actually like survived a camp. My mom decided to raise us Catholic. I don't know why. I guess her family was, and she said she wanted me to choose, but I didn't find out I was Jewish until I was an adult. So it was like, you didn't really give me a choice. And then my grandmother's Buddhist, because my dad's side's Japanese. So like all of the things. So I've been presented so many different ways to look at God and spirituality and morality, and I feel like there's this myth that it's a one-size-fits-all with all of the above, that morality even is universal, and it's obviously not true. I think it was Jamie Wheel, and I don't know if it was in his book Recapture the Rapture or if it was at a talk I went to, but he's like, just to prove that morality like is a range, we say eating people is wrong, right? Cannibalism is wrong. Well, that is alive and well in some parts of the world, and it is actually part of like that person moving on to the next world. Obviously, I don't agree, not at all, but I'd have to argue with someone else who says that I'm the crazy person. So I don't think, again, when it goes back to there's this one way to do it, that never really resonated with me. And I also am not the type of person to be told what to do. So the minute that you're like, this is what you're doing, I'm like, well, I'm going to go over here and do this other thing. So sometimes that's good. Sometimes it's kind of like bit me in the butt.
Yeah.
But yeah, all over. What about you guys? Spiritual journey.
Yeah, I was raised Catholic. I mean, my dad's from Lebanon, my mom's from Puerto Rico, and my dad was raised pretty much like in the Orthodox type church. And my mom was raised Catholic, then her family converted to like Protestant. And I went to Catholic school growing up, and then I've just kind of like, I'm doing a ton of research on my own right now and everything. And yeah, it's been It's been quite an eye-opening journey for me personally.
Yeah, I was raised in like the standard quintessential mega church. You know, my dad was the flying angel at Christmas.
No way.
Oh yeah. I sang in choir. I like kissed my first girl hiding in the pulpit. So like we would always go to choir. So we sang like I was at church maybe 4 to 5 days a week. My parents were in choir. I sang in choir. We did Awanas. And so I kissed my first girl in the pulpit on the main stage, like, because no one was in there, and we like snuck up there. We're sitting there, you know. So but yeah, Christianity's in my blood. My brothers volunteer at their churches. My brother-in-law was a full-time pastor. My uncle's a 32-year missionary in Kiev, and so it's in my blood. But my brother-in-law, who was a full-time pastor, one night we were just sitting around. He's like, "Hey, I think I understand Paul in those early writings now." And he's like, "I'm about to preach myself out of a job." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, I understand Paul now, and I understand like the message of Christ, and I'm going to preach myself out of a job. And he did. He quit his full-time pastorship, and he got a job at Trader Joe's and started a home church. And yeah, it's like when you really look at the New Testament and that message of Christ, and then you walk into Joel Osteen's church, or you walk into even small churches, once you watch our show, you're going to be like, I see how all of this, the building, the children's care, that writing on the wall, everything is tied back to that 14-point checklist from the IRS, everything. And so when you look at churches now, you go, this is a byproduct of U.S. tax law. That's it. So this isn't the church. I don't know what this is. It's not a church. It's not the original church. And when you're able to swallow that pill, then that belief structure moves to faith, and you're like, okay, like let's turn on our adventure hat, and then it gets fun. Yeah.
So go back to the we were talking earlier about like when you go back to the source of Christianity, Jesus, and what was the definition of church, and kind of what it like talk a little bit about what it's evolved to today.
Yeah. So the original Greek term is ecclesia. So if those words in the New Testament were actually Christ's words, and Christians believe they are, then he used the term ecclesia to define his body. And ecclesia in Greek literally translates to gathering. So if you were at the Colosseum and you went to the Colosseum to watch some gladiators fight back in the day, you're like, I'm going to the ecclesia, I'm gathering at the ecclesia, like we're gathering here. And so it's just people coming together. It's not the physical location. It's nothing. So if you take Christ, because if you're a professed Christian, you're going to want to go back to his words, right? You want to know your Savior's words. That's it. You don't care what the pastor on stage is saying. It might sound nice, but you want to know what Christ actually said. So he said, "You are my ecclesia. Don't forsake the ecclesia. Don't forsake the gathering, the coming together of Christians, and breaking bread and doing communion and encouraging and exhorting one another." That's church, encouragement and exhort. That's it. So, okay, if that's the church, if the real church, and I would consider this right now church. Then what the three of us are doing is we're gathering for church right now because we're talking about faith and spirituality. So if this is church, what is this table? What is the TV? What is, if you go to a bigger church, what is that worship band? What is the coffee bar? What is the parking? What is the landscaping? What is the childcare? What is the donuts? And you just keep stacking all that up. All of that is just cultural things we've built on top of the church. So, and this is the problem in America, in the world right now, is we've lumped the two together. And so we can't, when you walk into a megachurch, most people can't call the building what it is. because they've lost the definition, and pastors have lost the definition too. So in our show, we've got to rip all that cultural stuff off, and we've got to set them side by side. And once we're able to define Christ's real church, you can look at all this for what it is. And it's a business. Mm-hmm. It's a nonprofit business, but it's a business. And so what do you do with businesses? You got to regulate them, because if you don't regulate them, humans are going to human. Yep. And so who wants to regulate this? The body. This gathering wants to regulate that. And once you're able to break those apart and you're able to say, hey, the body needs to regulate this institution that we've built, this is where it gets fun. The biggest financial asset of Christians of Christianity in America is their real estate. Their real estate sits empty and unused 96% of the time. So if you see this as a business, you go, whoa, what a waste of business assets. Why don't we figure out how to utilize the business more? Mm-hmm. Why don't we figure out how to utilize the property? And here's what I love. Christians love to scream about abortion, right? And so, okay, instead of screaming about abortion, you know that $3 million children's care facility that you have open 1 day a week? Why don't you open it to single moms 7 days a week?
Whoa, yeah.
Why don't you start utilizing your assets as a business and milking those assets to the bone? Then Christians would look at Joel Osteen and be like, hey, screw your carpet, man. Bring these people in here. Let's use this building. It's an asset. And so that's where it gets fun.
I'm surprised that they didn't do it anyways, though, because it's the whole point of giving and charity. And so it's just carpet.
But
it's a material
I'll actually push back. Would a TV station want you to dirty their carpet?
Well, for sure, definitely not. But the mattress guy, what was his name? Mattress Mac?
Mattress Mac.
Yeah. I mean, that gentleman did. He didn't give a shit.
Yeah, and he's a for-profit. Like his building and that he uses to generate profit and the actual products he sells had people who became homeless sleeping on what he sells. Wow.
But it goes back to ironically, the moral integrity of people. Right. Americans need to grow spines again, and we can do that. We can grow spines and do it intelligently and articulately. We're not barbarians with clubs running around anymore. It's like we can have civil conversations and talk. And that's the thing. I think our silver lining might be that we're not bashing religion,
right.
Or faith. It's like we're just saying, hey, you can utilize your resources much better.
Yeah, one of my friends was saying principles aren't principles if they kind of crumble under any kind of pressure. And I think that's so true. So it's really easy to say that lying is wrong, stealing is wrong, taking advantage, fraud, manipulation, all of these things. But then if you get really put to the task, you're like, well, I don't want to lose my space in the community. I don't want my kids to get berated. I don't want to lose my account, whatever it is. Well, that's not really a principle then. Yeah. It's very well said. Yeah. So we'll see. We'll come back in a year and see how the dust is settled after the show and the app launches. Yeah, no, I wish you guys all the best with everything. Can you tell people how they can support you, timelines, anywhere to find you, all that good stuff, plug away? Yeah, the biggest way to support us is, there's a few different ways. If you're a church, a nonprofit, and want to connect and talk about the solution side of things, please DM us. Best way to get a hold of us is on Instagram, since we got permanently banned from TikTok, and just DM us. I would also the Religion Business website, and the biggest thing is we need help spreading the word. Like, share, repost the content, and get involved, get engaged in the dialogue and conversation, because we're really trying to build a community that's a safe place for people to talk about this. And you don't have to agree with us. It's fine. Disagree with us all you want, but let's have the discussion. It's another thing. People are really afraid to talk. If there's a perceived disagreement, we're not going to get along, we're going to hate each other. It's come on, grow up. Well, just don't revert to name calling. Yeah. And I would just say, if there's again, our biggest need is awareness. And so coming on your podcast, which is going to become a church, by the way, coming on your podcast is huge. So if there's other podcasts that have reach, that are interested in this subject, we would love to come on and talk. Yeah. It's we are trying to create a conversation and basically prep the community and the nation for what's coming down the pipeline, which it's it's going to be a big conversation. And so our goal is just awareness. Spread the word, because we've been throttled. Yeah. I mentioned multiple times we got permanently banned from TikTok, but even just on other social media platforms, our stuff will get reposted 800 to 1,000 times,
and like less than 2% of non-followers will actually get to see it.
Yeah.
It's like, how does that work?
And you're preaching the choir there. I'm
Yeah.
in the same
Yeah.
boat. Yeah, the same exact
It's
boat.
frustrating.
So yeah, I don't want. Never mind. I'm not going to go down that. I don't want to.
You might, we
Make
might
it
get
worse.
banned from that, from the
I'm
only
not
ones
gonna
we
talk-
have left.
I'm not going to talk about.
We love you, Mark.
Yeah.
Don't take our accounts.
He's
No.
a jiu-jitsu guy.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was waiting for that fight to actually happen, but I don't know if it's going to. I
Oh,
think the
I
world
love-
was waiting.
I would
Oh,
love to
that
see
would have been
that.
awesome.
At the Coliseum, the
Yeah.
whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Give the people
Elon's
what they want.
Elon's a lot bigger than Mark, but Mark's younger, more nimble.
And put in this. Well, I don't know if Elon's ever trained, right? Like he's new
He
to
used
it.
to do some judo, but like they have two totally different approaches to life. I mean, Elon works 18 hours a day. He runs so many businesses, and he's so heavily involved with them. Not to say Zuckerberg doesn't work, but like Zuckerberg has a lot more free. Like part of his work is him doing his jiu-jitsu, right? Like that's part of his brand, whereas Elon puts a lot of time in his brand in a lot of content that he puts out and posts that he puts out. So yeah, that would have been that. Yeah, that'd be hilarious to watch.
Well, this has been awesome, guys. I'll make sure I link everything below so that everyone can find you. And yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah,
Good
this
luck,
was
guys.
awesome.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Candice.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
See you guys.